Welcome to another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast, the podcast where we discuss everything Orlando Magic basketball. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon, and today we got a couple of things to get into. But before we get started, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that post notification bell so you always know we're dropping new videos. Hit that hype button on YouTube so we can continue to grow in the algorithm. Shout out to those who are already subscribed. Let's go ahead and get right into today's video. And by the way, I apologize for audio quality issues from last episode. Come to find out, I'm not very used to having an echo knob on my microphone, so it sounded like I was stuck in somebody's dungeon. We back to regularly scheduled program. Thank you guys for being able to bear with me through last episode. Should be fixed for today. Let's go ahead and get right into it. Starting off with John Beeline, former Michigan coach, former winningest coach in program history with 278 victories, leading the program to two national championship appearances, is going to be joining the bench next to Sean Sweeney. This is huge to me. This is huge because, of course, a lot of people were very worried about Sean Sweeney being brought on in place of Jamal Mosley for the reasoning of although his name was buzzing in the assistant coach to head coach ranks as far as being a guy that was being heavily discussed as a potential, first time head coach in this coaching cycle, the worry for the Orlando Magic particularly, and I had this same worry as well, Sean Sweeney comes from a defensive background. Jamal Mosley came from a defensive background. Orlando's issue, although last season the defense wasn't as good as it's been in years past. Orlando's issue has not necessarily been the defensive side of the ball over the course of the last 3 to 4 years. The issue has been offense. So bringing in Sean Sweeney, I think yes, of course, first things out would be he's going to revitalize the offense from where it was last season, where they'll be back to that top 5, top 10 status consistently over the course of the entire year that they were, in years previous. But I think bringing in John Beeline, he comes in as somebody who helps present more of an offensive mindset to this team. I think combining the talents of John Beeline with somebody like Joe Prunty, who acted as a bit of like the offensive coordinator for this team last season, the hope is that those two could collaborate in a real way where you can see some impact on the floor, particularly in the half court. Shout out to somebody on Twitter. I actually want to make sure I give him the proper just due because he did a really interesting, great thing in my personal opinion, where he posted some film tape of I think his name is T Knowles. Yeah, I believe his name is T Knowles on Twitter/X, and he posted like a teach tape video from some Michigan film back during the time in which John Beeline was coaching the Michigan Wolverines. And one of the things that you see impactfully within the video is this use of a two guard motion system, and it's the implied backcourt utilization, forcing players like Jalen Suggs, Anthony Black, Tristan Da Silva to a lesser degree. Desmond Bain will be huge within this flow system of a lot of motion oriented offense, acting off of two guards and utilizing power forward screen setting, which is going to be a way to free up Paolo Banchero as a pick and pop player or as somebody who can be a decent role man. The thing that stood out to me within that video, and the thing that stands out to me within just kind of getting an understanding of how Michigan's offense ran under John Beeline is there is a lot of off ball two man movement between the two guards in the backcourt and typically the screen setter in terms of being able to flare and set things up, as well as the other two players off the kilter to help create the level of spacing where there's always a certain, you know, level of distance between each player that creates havoc. What I mean by that is essentially, and you'll see it in the video, there's always two shooters, there's always two designated floor spacers, and three players always moving in constant motion, whether it's screen setting, backdoor cutting, rejecting the screen and operating in that action. There's always some version of a two-man game at the top of the key that creates this level of freedom that can either lead to a downhill drive, lead to a lob of some sort. If the roll man isn't tagged, there's a lot of stuff that I saw within John Beeline's offense, and I'll maybe do like a deeper dive on this if I once I kind of like sit down and really get an understanding of it. But the longest short is John Beeline's offensive mind. He is tagged as like an offensive mastermind kind of coach, so to speak, from some of the things that I did Google about him. Brings a certain level of experience again as a guy who has been, been a part of the collegiate ranks for the longest. Of course, has sent plenty Michigan players to the NBA, so has a familiarity from that perspective of being able to get guys to the next level. And again, I think him being on this bench along with Joe Prunty in an ecosystem with Sean Sweeney, where I think they'll have a little bit more freedom to really kind of call the offense, as opposed to with Jamal Mosley. There was this, there was this, just go out and hoop mentality. I think that Joe Prunty and John Beeline should and will be able to put their thumb on the scale a little bit more and have this team really running sets and things of that nature. I think I've been saying this for the longest. I believe that's been the thing that's been missing from the Orlando Magic this entire era of the Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Desmond Bain. I mean, excuse me. Well, Desmond Bain now as well, but of this Desmond Bain, Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs era, and even before Desmond Bain got on the team, that's what they've been missing. Is this team's just been going out free balling, and because if Jamal Mosley saw you playing hard and you were high energy, high effort, then he felt like he was getting the most out of you. And in reality, that lack of real structure and just saying go out there and hoop, I think that's the thing that's really hurting this team. And I think somebody like John Beeline, who comes from a perspective of, again, in college they run a lot more sets. In college the half court game is emphasized so much more that there's not as much run and gun in college as far as transition play, right? These are things that I think will I think these are the type of things that John Beeline's background can truly help improve the Orlando Magic. So I'm actually pretty excited about what he brings to the table here. And I think, quite frankly, that it's going to be a big deal as far as big upping this team. Um, Again, I don't want to overstate it too much because it is going to be interesting to see how much power he has from an offensive control standpoint. But if he is able to implement some of these two guard motion offense, perspectives and things of that nature, I think that'll answer one of our biggest issues as a team that last year, whether it was me or you guys in the comment section, constantly were dubbing like, yo, this team has no ball movement, no off the ball movement, just a bunch of guys standing around and either create off the dribble in isolation, or one player comes set a screen and then it's make something happen. And it's like, no, we need to see actual player movement in order to create advantages. That's why the dang offense looked so clunky. In John Beeline's offense, there's always two pointed shooters and three men always moving, whether it's an off the ball cutter, screen setter into a roll, screen setter into a pop, screen into reject the screen by the two guard that ends up leading to a back door, screen into the two guard being able to flare out, creating an action for the ball handler to be able to dribble drive. A lot of different opportunities where there's always a three-man action with two possible pop-out shooters that could be really, really dangerous. And you got to think that doesn't always have to be the guard, right? That could be Franz Wagner initiating with Paulo Banchero as the screen setter, with Desmond Bain as the secondary reject the screen guy, and you have Jalen Suggs and, let's say, Wendell Carter probably would stay. Maybe it would be Wendell Carter who's the screen setter. Paulo Banchero could be somebody that's a pop out man along with Jalen Suggs, or maybe Jalen Suggs is the initiator with the Paulo Banchero two-man action as well as a secondary screener with Wendell Carter Jr. And you have two shooters in Franz Wagner, and you have Desmond Bain out there, and you have Jalen Suggs as the live dribble drive, Paulo Banchero as the rim roll slash pop out man, and you have Wendell Carter Jr. as the secondary tag in case for whatever reason Paulo Banchero is put in a position where he's covered. Now you have Wendell Carter Jr. as a secondary roller or a secondary side pop out man. There's a bunch of different things where just finding a little bit of motion, even if it's just three men action where three are moving but two other players are kind of just on the outside roaming to keep themselves a hot hand available in case they need the kick out. That's still a lot more than what we saw last season, where it was just somebody gets the ball at the top of the key, or somebody gets the ball at the top of one of the wings, dribbles until they see an opening, or gets one screen, and then everything goes tunnel vision. We need more than that, and I think that this is an opportunity for that. Nonetheless, let's go ahead and move on to what I think is also going to be important when we talk about Sean Sweeney, which is defining success. Sports Illustrated recently did an article in which they had each of their writers kind of decide slash share what they believe a successful first season for Orlando's Sean Sweeney will look like. Now, I'm not going to read all three of them because I would like everybody to read the article for itself, but I think that quite frankly, what I am gonna do is I'm gonna read what Zach Lowe had to say about getting Paulo Banchero to the next level. He says getting more comfortable and shooting is part of this, not playing the number one option role all the time because you have another really good player in Franz Wagner. Now, the thing is, I think one of the most important aspects of this team for me is that this team needs to create a cohesive offense. And Sports Illustrated mentions this, that this team, if there's anything this season that this team needs to figure out, it is how to establish an offense that they can use that is reliable, consistent, and relies on multiple options to be effective. One of the most notable things that I saw last season, and a lot of people touched on this, was Paulo Banchero seemed to struggle significantly on the offensive end last season without Franz Wagner on the floor as a secondary pressure player on the rim, right? That's why Anthony Black was such a grace of God last season as far as his development as an on-ball player to kind of take that Franz Wagner role as another player who operates really well in transition, somebody who can be a really good downhill threat, and somebody that when he was really rolling was just as much of a threat as getting to the basket and drawing contact as Franz Wagner was when he was healthy. Now, Franz still has a certain gear to him that I think makes him a little bit more refined than Anthony Black at that role, but nonetheless, that's part of what made Anthony's development curve last season in the beginning of the year so special and so impactful for the Magic when they were without Franz Wagner for as long as they were. This is a team that needs to be able to understand you have Paulo Banchero, who I believe is a dangerous low post operating player. He is somebody that I believe within 10 feet of the basket is one of the best players in the NBA because of his ability to create and finish through contact. Franz Wagner is somebody who is most dangerous operating as a top left or top right wing player, gives him the operation to be able to utilize a half side of the court and dribble drive actively. And he's one of the better wings at being able to live dribble his way into a paint touch that either gets him into a rise mid range shot, or his most specialized ability is to be able to get to the rim and finish around slash through contact. So again, we have two players who do very good at being able to get to the rim, but they operate from two totally different spaces in order to do so. Paulo Banchero is more of a 10 and in high operator when that's the best version of himself, but he's not falling in love with his mid-range shot. Paulo Banchero is most dangerous when he is a 10 and in. That doesn't mean he has to have a back to the basket, Al Jefferson post game. Nobody's saying that Paulo Banchero needs to play that way in order to be most successful. But I do think, as much as we use the Carmelo Anthony comp, or I also threw out Julius Randle last episode, having that back to the basket game that can turn into turnaround jumpers and things of that nature, it is one of the more highlighted aspects of Paulo Banchero's game, is that when he's able to get into that low post area and operate within that, or even 10 and in off a live dribble and put his head down off of one or two dribbles and get to the rim, that's when he's the most dangerous. You saw that with Carmelo Anthony all the time. He'd get the ball within about, you know, 10 to 15 feet. He'd jab once, 1-2 dribble, head down. He'd give the bump of a lifetime, which is why everybody would always say after playing Carmelo Anthony, you had to ice up because it felt like you just got, completely beat up by a boxer for the last 48 minutes, right? And it puts you in a predicament where now you either have to foul, you get bumped off your kilter and he gets an easy shot, or you foul and Paulo finishes through contact, and we're going to the free throw line with a chance to either and one or get two shots, right? So You have two play, and then again you go to Franz. Franz is somebody who, if you can give him an isolation off one side of the court, and you're able to create actions that free him up, he's a player that does really good at the swooping motion, which means he can start from the left wing and go to his right and operate where he's trying to get to the middle center of the floor and get to the paint and get his paint touch to operate in that way, or do the opposite from the left wing going right. Excuse me, I did that opposite. Left wing going right, right wing going left. But it's all about creating a dribble drive active where usually what'll happen is, let's use because Franz Wagner's a little bit better from a right hand perspective. Let's say Franz Wagner gets the ball at the top of the left hand key. He's heading to dribble drive right. What would happen is Franz Wagner would start from the right. He would start from the left. Wendell Carter Jr. would come up and set a screen facing the left baseline, and the goal would be to be able to get around, force the defender to feel the threat to need to go over the screen. And if because Franz Wagner has a good speed to him, despite being a much larger wing, he's usually able to beat that defender off the dribble if he's not passed in a zone coverage, which nowadays, like, a lot of teams don't really run zone heavily. There's a few teams that run zone at a high clip, but not too many. And so it creates disadvantages. There's certain things like that you just need to take advantage of your star skill set. I think another thing is the utilization of Desmond Bain as a 3 point shooter. I want Desmond Bain to take 8, 9 3 point attempts per game. That's what he said he was going to do last season. He ended up only taking about 5 to 6 per game, which was actually one of the lower volume shot ranges for him from beyond the arc of his career so far. He was talking about wanting to be in the career high range. That's where he needs to be at. I'm going to read one paragraph. I'm going to read one paragraph from one of the writers, Matt Hanafan, and I encourage you guys to read the entire article because I think that it's a very insightful one. But he says a successful season for Sean Sweeney revolves around maximizing their tantalizing trio of Desmond Bain, Franz Wagner, and Paulo Banchero, advancing past the first round, which the Magic haven't done since 2009 2010. Obviously, the goal is to compete for a championship, and a healthy Magic. And a healthy Magic are well equipped to play spoiler in a 7 game series. But if Sweeney can unlock the aforementioned trio offensively with a top 10 defense, Orlando could very well compete for home court in the East and snap their postseason series losing streak. So he wants this team to revitalize their energy and efforts on defense and, quite frankly, get the best out of their top three offensive players. Again, look at the layering of your team. Paolo Banchero operates best 10 and in. Franz Wagner operates best starting from the perimeter but getting downhill. Desmond Bain works best as a movement flare shooter, right? So that's either a small screen set, flare out, jump shot. That's two-man action, off ball movement, comes off cut, fires off contact, right? That's one of those things where maybe there's a live dribble drive by Franz Wagner. He swoops from the left side into the right, isn't able to get all the way to the paint, so he does a kick out. Desmond Bain's hands are ready, boom, ready fire, right? Desmond Bain is one of the better movement shooters in the NBA. You don't have to have him running through a million screens like Steph Curry, but you need to have him as you utilize his ability as a movement shooter. Use his ability to be able to shoot the ball at a high clip, off the catch, off the move, off screens, off flares. Turn Desmond Bain into a JJ Redick esque kind of player. Like Desmond Bain, because his threat as a 3 point shooter then exposes other guards who then bite so much on his 3 point shot that they forget that he's a dangerous live dribble player as well. Look at how often Desmond Bain tried to get to the rim last season. That was just him getting absorbed by Orlando Magic culture, as far as I'm concerned, because that's what our team does, right? Jalen Suggs, Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Anthony Black, Jamal Cain, right? They get that's the bread and butter of the Orlando Magic. Hey, we're not a good 3 point shooting team. Get to the rim. Get to the rim. Get to the rim. So Desmond Bain got caught up in that culture of getting to the rim. But the thing that can unlock him, a ton. And I think you could utilize Tristan da Silva in this way a little bit as well, based off of how he shot the three ball last year. Create more movement off the ball. Now you look at that three-layered attack from your three main star guys. Paulo Banchero operates 10 and in. You also have Wendell Carter Jr. as a lob threat, right posted underneath the basket at the nail, as a guy within 2 to 3 feet can either be a putback rebounder off misses because he is a very good rebounder or a solid rebounder. Think about Nikola Vucevic, who can actually benefit from this. He's a very strong offensive and defensive rebounder. So that's somebody you can post at the nail or be a strong rebounder underneath. You have Paulo Banchero operate 10 and in. You have Franz Wagner, who starts on the perimeter, but his goal is to get to the basket. So yes, his goal is to operate within similar spaces, Paulo, but his starting point is from a much different angle. So now you just have to create the spacing to allow Franz to get there. And if for whatever reason he's cut off because there's a secondary slide man who's playing the poke or whatever it is, now you've got kickouts. Now you got kickouts to guys like that can move off the ball, like Anthony Black, like Jalen Suggs, like Desmond Bain, who can come off these curl actions and different things like that to either get the ball off and catch and shoot and fire or shoot. Franz Wagner swoops from the left hand side, the left hand corner, gets stopped because there's a second slide. There's a kick to Desmond Bain. Desmond Bain doesn't fire because he's covered, but he fires off from the right hand side. Now he swoops. Franz has already cleared out all this space. He comes through. Wendell Carter Jr. steps up, sets a screen at the free throw line. Now Desmond Bain has a shot in the mid range area, freed up all through this created action. Think about what I just said. Think about what I just said. The action starts with Paulo Banchero 10 in, Wendell Carter Jr. underneath the basket on the right hand side. Jalen Suggs probably on the far wing on the right hand side. Desmond Bain on the top right key. Franz Wagner at the top left key. The operation starts with Paulo Banchero standing within the 10 feet area. Probably steps up to come set a screen to allow Franz Wagner to swoop from the left hand side of the court through to the right hand side and get to the middle. This also brings Paulo Banchero out as a pop out man, because what would happen is he would set the screen and then pop out and take his guy out to the 3 point line. Franz continues to drive. Let's say the player that's guarding Desmond Bain also is able to kind of come in. Let's say they're playing a zone, comes in and he's able to put his hand in and poke, or he's within range to be able to come in and poke for Franz Wagner. What Franz could do is when that bite happens, he can then swing the ball to Desmond Bain, who's moving within the action closer to the top of the key, almost as if they're trading spaces. And it's almost like a live dribble handoff. Now Franz Wagner has cleared all this space coming this way in the action because the other man comes to bite down from Desmond Bain down to Franz Wagner. Desmond Bain has a full head of steam with the other player guarding him behind, off on his back hip, right? In that action, you're able to have Wendell Carter Jr. come up as somebody who can also, again, part of that free up space. And now what happens is what happens is essentially by watching that happen, you've seen Paulo Banchero come out, you've seen Franz Wagner, Wendell Carter Jr., and Jalen Suggs all end up overloading the right hand side, and it creates a situation where it's a two-man game between Paulo Banchero and Desmond Bain on the left hand side of the floor. That's all that what ends up happening in that, Desmond can continue his live dribble and try to get to the basket. Because of the fact that the other player would be on his back hip, he could stop and pop for mid range, and he can either make the mid range jump shot, he can make the mid range jump shot, get fouled from behind and get and one, or let's say he shoots, gets fouled from behind, doesn't make the shot, but now we got two free throws. Or let's say the other player is able to recover, catches for a good contest, you still have Paulo Banchero on that left side from the initial action as an available option. Man, I really wish I had like visuals and stuff for all of this, but what I'm trying to say is there is a way to unlock this offense, guys. There is a way to unlock this offense. It's all just going to come down to really utilizing the strengths of these Orlando Magic star players. And I think that, again, read the rest of the article for yourselves, because not everything is like built out of like the offense has to be better. Some of these other successful season suggestions go a little bit beyond that. But I think the key to this season is unlocking these three together, and it's understanding the strengths of these three and how that creates so much for everybody else. Because you can create havoc in the half court with this team, even if it's not a good floor spacing team. You can create havoc, because the thing that every team has to respect you on is playing, because of them playing off, because they don't trust your three ball. There's so much you can do with movement to create actions where now you're giving every single one of our drivers a head of steam, where they're not getting a true contest until they're close to the basket, because everybody's playing for paint. Because the Orlando Magic are not a good three-point shooting team, everybody's playing for paint. So by having a bunch of different actions off the ball, you're utilizing the active space that defenses are giving you, because they're not worried about you as a three-point shooting team. But by giving you that space, you're giving our downhill creators more room to get ahead of steam, to then be able to be physical and get to the rim. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that with a lot of different players. Whether that's Paulo screening for Desmond, Desmond screening for Paulo screening for Franz, and creating all of these different movement actions. And that's not even including the off the ball stuff with Jalen Suggs maybe kind of side galloping across one of the sidelines as a potential catch and shoot option on one of the wings as like a corner 3-point shooter, where I think maybe he could be the most effective. Or Desmond Bain running off screens or rejecting screens off of like flare cut actions to be able to get, or like V cut actions to be able to get himself open at the top of the key for 3-point shots. There's a lot of different stuff you could do with this team. You just gotta use the melon. You just gotta use the melon, man. I'm sorry I nerded out there for a second again. I wish I had visuals for this stuff, cause Jesus, man. Anyway, this team has so much potential. It has so much potential if these guys can just unlock the offense. Let's talk about Anthony Black, man. Bleacher Report gives Anthony Black the fourth best odds for Sixth Man of the Year, and their early betting odds for each of the awards for this upcoming season. At plus 700 is Dylan Harper of the San Antonio Spurs, AJ Mitchell at plus 800 for the Oklahoma City Thunder, Anthony Simons at plus 1100 for the Philadelphia 76ers, along with Anthony Black at fourth at 1800, Reed Shepard of the Houston Rockets, 1800, and Peyton Pritchard of the Boston Celtics at 1800. Quite frankly, I think that everybody needs to understand Anthony Black is in a big year situation. Prove it, deal time. Last season we saw a tale of two Anthony Blacks. First half of the year looked like he could have been a six man of the year. Well, more of a most improved player. Six man of the year kind of went out the window when Franz went down with injury for as long as he did, because Anthony Black was called on to be a starter so often throughout the season. But this was a guy who was really in the most improved player race. I think he had a really good chance to at least be, let's say, in the top 5 in the conversation, had he been able to keep up what he was doing in the first half of the year. Now you're going into a contract year for an Orlando Magic team that already has a lot of different money situations to figure out. And quite frankly, the biggest thing Anthony Black has to figure out is, I think this isn't about being able to go out there and go get buckets. I think this is about being a true two-way player. Anthony Black showed last season that he could play the 1 through the 3 on multiple occasions as a utility player last year. I think Anthony needs to be able to build off of that and show that versatility in a lot of different lineups, where I see a world where, especially with John Beeline's acquisition, I could see a world where this team is just like, yo, let's go guard heavy, and let's do Jalen Suggs, Desmond Bain, Anthony Black, Franz Wagner, Paulo Banchero at the 5. Let's have a ton of movement. Let's have a bunch of guys who can put pressure on the rim, a whole bunch of actions utilizing the guards, and let's make this thing happen. Let's make this thing happen. I think there's a real chance here for Anthony Black to really pop this upcoming season. Now, of course, injuries is what kind of set him back in the second half of the year, but this is a team that I think has a really good chance to make something happen. And I want y'all to understand, I know college is a totally different game, but John Beeline has sent guys like Tim Hardaway Jr. to the league, has become a prolific three-point shooter in this league. Once upon a time, I know you guys remember big time guard Trey Burke, right? Big time guard back in college. Got to the league through Michigan. There's a lot like one of the things that John Beeline, if there's one thing I could say, if I remember his tenure with the Michigan Wolverines well, is he gets guards to the league. He gets the most out of his guards. So I think this is a year where Anthony Black, Desmond Bain, um, Jalen Suggs. I think Tristan Da Silva can be included into this to a certain degree, even though I know he plays more of a small forward role. Because I think he plays more like a glorified shooting guard. Like he doesn't play with physicality as much. He plays more like a shooter at the small forward position. I think that John Beeline, if he could implement some of the things we saw from his coaching tenure with Michigan, I think that this could be a big year for the guards for the Orlando Magic. A big year for the entire guard rotation for the Orlando Magic. But if there's one thing I know, if you go back to that list again, I mentioned Burke, I mentioned Tim Hardaway Jr. I'm sure there's plenty that I'm missing because again, there's a more than a handful of guards from that Michigan lineage that have made it to the NBA. But if there's one thing John Beeline does a great job of doing is getting guards league ready. And so I think that Anthony Black, I think that John Beeline's hiring could be a sneaky addition to things, especially taking the place of God Sham God, who I think played a big part in Anthony Black's development last season. I think John Beeline coming in and doing it more from an X's and O's standpoint as opposed to a more direct player development perspective, the way God Sham God did. I think could be a really great way to unlock that next gear for Anthony Black and the rest of the backcourt. And last but not least, staying in the backcourt, Sam Vecini of The Athletic on his podcast, the Game Theory Podcast. Love that podcast, by the way. Recently, they did their 16 through 25 top defenders in the NBA, and I believe Jalen Suggs was named either 22nd or 23rd on that top defenders list, mainly hinting to the fact that he is just a guy that creates havoc. Yes, he's a gambler. Yes, his gambling can sometimes end up creating negative situations, but he just plays with a lot of energy. He's a make something happen player. And guess who he compared Jalen Suggs to as a player? Guess who he compared him to? For those in the comment section who said Derek White, you listen to this podcast because I've been saying this since basically the beginning iteration of the Magic latest podcast, that this Orlando Magic team feels like they've built themselves in a similar way to the championship team that the Boston Celtics had. And the player that Jalen Suggs needs to be within that action is a Drew Holiday, Derek White kind of player. More particularly, Derek White as a defender. But Drew Holiday was also a high level defender. The issue was that if you look at it from the perspective of like trying to make it one for one, Jalen Suggs is closer to Drew Holiday, but plays more. He's closer. He's the a level of elite defender that Drew Holiday was at that time, but he plays more like Derek White. He plays like Derek White. Derek White for that Boston Celtics team, high volume 3-point shooter, big time defender, big on steals and blocks. I mean, I think Derek White even last season averaged almost 3 stocks a game, right? All of that is stuff that Jalen Suggs, Derek White just does everything Jalen Suggs does, but quieter and a lot less like on a lot more under control. Derek White, in my personal opinion, is just, and Drew Holiday kind of follows this ilk to a certain degree as well. But I want to stick with Derek White. Derek White does everything Jalen Suggs does, but quieter and with more control. as far as being a disruptor on the perimeter, as a perimeter defender, point of attack defender, as a rim protector, secondary rim protector at the guard position. Mind you, Derek White's like 6'4". Like he's not like towering over Jalen. So like their profiles as guards are very similar. Jalen and Derek White's name, I believe, does come up a little bit later in that podcast. I think Derek White falls somewhere between like 16 and 18 on their list, if I'm not mistaken, as far as top defenders in the NBA. So very, very similar players. This is one of those tricky things with Jalen Suggs, where of course we also know that the numbers indicate that this Orlando Magic team is just better when Jalen Suggs is on the floor, even with all of his gambling and everything else that tends to create, situations where maybe the defense or even shoot on offense with his heat checking could become a little off kilter. But Jalen Suggs is a make it happen kind of player. I'm glad he got shouted on the pod. By the way, as part of Sam Vecini and Bryce Simon, because I want to shout out him as the co-host, as part of their honorable mentions, Wendell Carter Jr. was named in their top 30. He was one of their first five off the list. So shout out Wendell Carter Jr. as well. He was one of their first five left off the list for their top defenders list. Again, I believe Jalen Suggs was somewhere between and 22 and 23, I believe, was where he was named at on their particular list, which I think is a great honor for him, especially coming off of last year where I don't think he was nearly as effective of a defender as he's capable of and as he's been in the past. But with all that being said, it's been another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast. Again, I apologize for last episode with the audio issues, and also earlier in the episode, I know there was a couple of rambles going on as far as me talking about some of the different actions and things like that from like a nerdy X's and O's standpoint. Again, I wish I had visuals and stuff. It probably would make things a little bit easier to digest and understand, but I hope some of that stuff made sense, or at least the best way for me to kind of put a pin in that is to say this Orlando Magic team is very capable. Offensively, I think there's a lot that they can really get out of this team. And I think that ball movement and player movement is going to be a great way to unlock this team. And I think Sean Sweeney and the introduction of John Beeline paired with another year of having Joe Prunty at the helm will be a great way to kind of bring all of that to fruition. And I think that, if you take all of the nerdy explaining X's and O's thing out, it just comes down to let's create actions and draw plays and create scenarios where we take advantage of each of our top three players' best skill sets. And that will be the thing that ends up bringing the best out of this team and making the most out of an offense that might not have the kind of floor spacing that some of these top league offenses that have a ton of 3-point shooting, and or they're one of the best transition teams in the league. If you're like the Indiana Pacers, we might not be that, but there's something else that this team does really well, and it starts with unlocking those three guys in Wagner, Bane, and Ben Carroll. All that being said, it's been another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that post notification bell so you always know we're dropping new videos. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.